Welcome to Rap Stories, a show where I get the background on some of my favorite albums of all time by the artists who made them. I'm your host, David Dennis Jr., and today I'm joined by underground king Bun B to discuss UGK's debut album, Too Hard to Swallow. Bun B and Pimp C, the group known as UGK, taught me how to love. Let me explain. I was 21 years old when Pimp C passed away in 2007. I was a young man, trying to figure out the world, and I was devastated by the death of one of my favorite rappers and voices of the South. I remember soon after, listening to an interview with Bun B. He was asked what was the last thing he said to Pimp C, and his answer changed my life. He said the last thing he told Pimp C was, "I love you." Why? Because that's what he would tell his brother at the end of every conversation. Before then, I'd never considered telling other men who weren't my dad that I loved them. But after hearing Bun B's interview, I texted my homies how much they meant to me and said, yes, I do love you. And I haven't stopped telling them since. The bond between Bun B and Pimp C has taught me so much about brotherhood, partnership, and collaboration. And that musical bond between these two legends shaped their debut album, 1992's Too Hard to Swallow. The album is two teenagers from Port Arthur, Texas, with their backs against the wall, creating a singular, unabashedly Southern album tailor-made for old school Cadillacs and Impalas, and setting the path for so much of what Southern hip-hop will become. To listen to Too Hard to Swallow is to hear two brothers figuring out their sound, their voices, and embracing their talent. The album feels like Bun B and Pimp C against the world, and winning. To be raised in the South is to love UGK, and to hear Too Hard to Swallow is to see where the legacy began. It's a historic piece of hip-hop lore, and for that alone, the foundation for one of the greatest rap groups of all time. And here to discuss Too Hard to Swallow is one of the godfathers of Southern rap, an honorable OG, and currently the owner of Trill Burgers, the best burgers in America. Bun B, welcome to Rap Stories.
Thanks for having me, man. Happy to be here.
Absolute honor, man. Let's get right into it, man. Too Hard to Swallow. There's so much to talk about. One thing that stuck out to me was the hook on I'm So Bad. And for those of you watching and listening, if you don't know what I'm talking about, pause this podcast, go listen, and come right back. Is one of the wildest songs like that I've ever. The hook is wild. It's just like a song that I feel like only Pimp C could make, and it works. Like, tell me what happened. You know, the making of that song, and your reaction to when you first heard it.
This is a very strange point to start. This is a very entry point to this conversation. I will say kudos to you for that one. Apparently, if I remember this right, he had watched a porn. And in the porn, I guess the dude did that. And
no, he didn't say he did it.
Like blew his mind because it wasn't like some shit he was expecting to happen in the movie. You know what I'm saying? And then he came back like, man, that's the wildest shit I ever seen in my life. And we were young. We were really big on like just making wild, crazy records. You know what I'm saying? But on this one, I was like, you might be on your own without him. You know what I'm saying? But, you know, just, you know, rap is very big on bragging and that type of shit. And, you know, without trying to get graphic or whatever, I would imagine this was about him professing his male prowess to a certain extent. You know what I'm saying? Right. Not sure how comfortable I feel talking about it. You know what I'm saying? This whole conversation is very pause-worthy.
Right.
But yeah, that's kind of what that was on, man. We were just young dudes, wild, like testing the limits, you know, so to speak. I don't think he meant it literally.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't really know how to speak to that one.
I mean, I'm just saying, but it's only Pimp C. I feel like, you know, like it's only him that could make that type of song. And it's like, it knocks, you know, you still listen to it and it you know, it does what it's supposed to.
Jam, I haven't heard it in years too. That's what's crazy. I haven't heard it in years. But I could hear the music like yesterday. But that was just him, you know, being very silly. Pimp had a very, very silly sense of humor. If I'm not mistaken, there's a lot of him laughing on that song, I think, at the end. So yeah, no, that was just, you know, young wild dudes just, you know, saying fuck it, kind of just saying whatever.
And I want to talk about that. I mean, that's sort of one of the reasons why I started with that, because like UGK has been like OGs seemingly for my entire life. And so like to listen to an album where y'all are young kids, you know, figuring this out, you know, is really interesting to go back and listen to. So I want to know what 19, 20-year-old Bun B and Pimp C were like.
At that particular time, Pimp was the introvert. I was the extrovert.
Mm-hmm.
So Pimp was really at home making beats, doing music, kind of locking into that. I was more out in the streets doing wild shit. We were very reckless. We were very irresponsible. I could definitely say that. You know, me, myself, you know, these were the years where I was smoking a lot of what we call fry or amp, which would be, you know, embalming fluid, angel dust, I think. Goes by a bunch of different names, which was a very terrible decision to make on my part. You know what I'm saying? But again, this was not the Bun B that you see nowadays, very calm, reserved. This was very young, wild, reckless, irresponsible. Bun B just out here being very careless, to be quite honest. You know what I'm saying? I'm very blessed to still actually be alive, because some of this shit I did back then, I was throwing a lot of rocks at the penitentiary. You know what I'm saying? And we were trying to transition fully into this music game and out of the streets. But that transition was not as simple and as quick as we thought it would be. You know what I'm saying? Contractual issues, problems with the record company, which would start to come up later on, really only made that worse at the time. I think, you know, we were all young, first of all, not just Pimp and myself, but the owners of the record company, Russell Washington and Steve. And shout out to Steve, because in this whole story of UGK, particularly the beginning of UGK, Steve, and God forgive me because I can't remember his last name. It's been a very long time. But Steve was part of helping build this. He was part of the ownership at the time. And, you know, this group would not have happened if Russell and Steve weren't working together to make this happen. As well as their women. You know, their women were very heavily involved with the process. Zena at the time, and Woman, who was Steve's girl at the time. They were very instrumental in giving us like real world, like it, you know, ears. You know, because sometimes we were a little too inside and too close to it to get the reaction of whether or not like people would like it in the club and that type of, would a woman want to dance to that. You know, they gave us that kind of direction, which is crazy because my wife now does that for me. You know, make sure, you know, that the music is relatable. And I just want to say that because I don't think those people collectively get enough credit. I think typically you hear my name, you hear Chad's name, you hear Russell's name, but there were a lot of people who were instrumental in that early day. But yeah, I'm saying all that to say we were very young, wild. We didn't really know what we were doing, and we were just out here on some fucking shit. If it happens, it happens. And we were very blessed because it actually did happen, and the music we made actually connected with people. Not maybe at that particular song though.
Right. What was the thing that turned your life around? You talked about you were, you know, making these decisions. You were on a very dangerous type of drug at the time, to be quite frank. And what turned your life around and sort of got you even off of, you know, that type of vice?
I think, you know, this probably a couple of years later, as I started to really understand how far the music was going, the kind of impact that we were making in the industry and the connection we were having with people, not to mention personal responsibilities coming into play, having a family, you know what I'm saying, a woman and children, counting on me. That changed a lot of shit in my life, you know what I'm saying? And that's when I started to kind of pull back and, you know, try to think things through a lot more. At the same time, not saying that Pimp was trying to not be responsible, but which he was always a good father to his children, but he was starting to realize who he was in this world. And this is getting closer to like riding dirty, you know what I'm saying? What I'm talking about now. And he wanted to go out and like actually really feel what it was like being Pimp C. And I'll be very honest. The year we made Riding Dirty, it was a very good year to go out and be Pimp C. You know, we weren't just UGK, a rap group. We were also, you know, I had ghostwritten for people around that time. He was doing beats for people, and he was singing a lot more hooks at the time. You know what I'm saying? So we were growing, not just collectively as UGK, but also individually as artists. And he took full advantage of being Pimp C around that time, and rightfully so, because he earned the right to be who he was. You know what I'm saying? Why'd I enjoy that shit?
When you talk about Jive, how did you get connected with Steve and Russell and the women there, and how did they move from just signing you guys to actually saying, we're going to put this album out?
Well, they had that idea to do that independently, right? And so we took some, you know, I don't want to get too deep into it, but, you know, there were things we had to do in order to raise the type of money that we felt it would take to pay for the studio time and get this thing printed and pressed up. You know, printing and pressing an independent record in 1992 was not as simple and easy a process as it is right now. You know, you have to create the artwork, and typically you would have to get that pressed separately. You know what I'm saying? So I went out and found some people, and, you know, I was like, hey, well, we need to print something. And they was like, what, a cassette cover? And they were like, well, we don't do that here. Just bring us the dimensions. So we went and got the actual dimensions. A good friend of mine, Ezekiel, took our pictures, you know, came down to Port Arthur, took the pictures, and we just kind of gave them the pictures, said, put this here, put that there, wrote this kind of shit out, and it just kind of happened. And so we went to a place called Southwest Wholesale, which was a record distribution company, which Russell had a relationship with because he was a record store owner. And so he presented this, you know, product to them. They sold it to record stores and a couple of other one-stops and local distributors in Texas and Louisiana picked it up. And what happened was, when it released independently, we dropped the same weekend or same week as Crisscross and Jump, the #1 song of the country and the #1 album in the country. But in Texas, in certain markets, we were either beating them or like a very close second. And so it got the attention of a lot of people, like, who is this group that's selling all these records up against the biggest record in the country? That started off a bidding war. And because we didn't really understand how that stuff went, you know, Wednesday, you know, Warlock Records is calling, and 4th and Broadway is calling, and then Thursday, you know, Select Records is calling, and you know, Friday, other different companies are calling, and then Saturday, nobody's calling, right? And then Sunday, nobody's calling. And we started wondering whether or not we had overplayed our hand, you know, like maybe we should have signed something. We got nervous because we're very new. We have no idea what we're doing. We don't know anybody to give us any direction. So we were like, fuck it, whoever called, next motherfucker to call, we're going to sign. And then Monday morning, the first people to call was Jive Records. Now, it never dawned on us in the moment that it was the weekend. The record companies are closed, and that's why nobody called on Saturday and Sunday. You know what I'm saying? But that's just the kind of mistake that we made. But, you know, sometimes these things are meant to happen, you know, and that's how UGK and Big Time Records ended up with that deal of going over to Jive Records.
What would you say would be the defining factor or reason that you guys were able to compete with the monster hit and album like Crisscross?
I think because we were talking in a way that people actually talked outside at the time. We were talking about things that I think people were actually talking about. The songs were very familiar, whether it was the Summer Breeze sample that we were rapping over or the Rufus and Shaka Khan Tell Me Something Good chorus in the song. These are very well-known songs in the community that we came from and the kind of people that we were speaking to. You know, I think we talked with confidence, you know what I'm saying? So it really sounded like we knew what we were talking about with people. That goes a long way sometimes. And we were just different. We were an alternative. at the time. And keep in mind, in the early 90s, rap music was still very hard to come by. Like if you wanted to hear new music, it wasn't always playing on the radio every day like it is now. You know, it wasn't always easily available. You had to go out and find a lot of music. And because of that, we ended up in a lot of record pools, which is how DJs around America used to get records. They didn't get emailed this shit to each other back then. You had to literally subscribe to a group and pay a certain amount of money for membership per year. And they would send you periodically records. I think once a month, you would get a bunch of 12-inch records. And record companies would pay record pools to put those records into distribution back then. And we ended up on a lot of college DJ playlists, and the word of mouth started going as people from where we were from in Port Arthur and people from Texas started to go to other universities. They would take the music with them. I remember when I met Cameron went to junior college on a basketball scholarship in Texas at a younger age. And that's how he heard UGK, you know, because everybody was playing it from Texas. And then he took that shit back to New York with him, you know, because there wasn't a lot of money spent by our record company for promotion and marketing outside of our immediate area, because they didn't think people would really understand it or want to fuck with it anyway.
And you talk about those samples, man, like the bunch of groundbreaking things in this album. One is just the way that these samples appear on the album. Use Me Up, Something Good. They're just like chopped up, just nasty. And the hooks are just incredible, the way that you use them. Talk about the development and choosing of those samples and how they were utilized in this album.
Well, I mean, obviously all the musical decisions for UGK came from Pimp C. You know what I'm saying? Like, so as far as, you know, the decision to sample from this artist or that artist, those ideas and decisions came from Pimp C. But this was all about having us be as well-rounded as possible, man, being as honest as possible. Like the whole idea of Use Me Up was, this was a very young Pimp C who was still actually in a relationship with somebody, still willing to, I guess, you know, trick off money, whatever. If you listen to the song, it's like, I'll spend whatever it is on you, you know what I'm saying? So this was just us trying to find the best way to tell either the stories we were going through or the things we were seeing, and being as, I don't want to say appreciated, but being as understood as possible. You know, we were from a very small town. We talk different. We use a lot of different terminology. So we had to make sure that whatever we were saying, that we could give enough perspective that people could kind of decipher what the fuck we was talking about. But, you know, even in the course of that, you know, the deeper thing about the samples we used was learning about the music industry, right? And this was in the time where, you know, record companies were getting very, very nervous and cautious about putting out rap music with samples. People were getting sued for usage at the time. And so I'll tell you a story. When we did Use Me Up, Use Me Up was a song where we had to get clearance from the artist in order to use the record, right? So the record company reached out to Bill Withers for the sample. Bill Withers is who wrote and produced the song Use Me Up. And Bill Withers said, I'll clear it, but let me talk to the group. I want to talk to the group. So we're sitting around the house, and one day Bill Withers calls us, you know? And Bill Withers is like, yeah, well, let me explain something to you guys. Do you guys own your publishing? And we were like, no, I think we sold it for like $50,000 or whatever. He's like, as soon as you get in a position, like, buy your publishing back. He says, because, you know, and this is with all due respect, because we have a better relationship now, but he was like, the guy that's running your record company is the nephew of the guy that ran my record company. And so the same way his uncle took my publishing, he taught him how to take your publishing. You know what I'm saying? So as soon as you guys can get in the position to get your publishing back, do that, because that's going to be what sustains you for years to come. And there was other different advice, you know, just about how to, you know, stay ahead of what you're getting recouped for and how much money you're spending and what you allow them to spend and all the different stuff that we actually never really knew anything about, you know. And the only reason we got that kind of education was because he saw fit enough to make a record that we had to go through for sampling. And because of that, we got like a firsthand education about what was really important about the music that we're sampling and creating. And the other thing that we learned from that is to try to not sample as much and find ways to go around, because everybody doesn't clear every sample, right? I remember when we did Cocaine in the Back of the Ride, the original version independently had a Bob Marley sample. When we tried to get it cleared for the album, Rita Marley declined it because Rita Marley said Bob was not cool with cocaine. Right? If y'all want to call it weed in the back of the ride, y'all can do that and I'll clear it all day. Right? But she was like, we can't associate Bob's music with cocaine because Bob wouldn't have wanted that. You know what I'm saying? So there was a lot of things we learned just to buy the music we were sampling at the time. I think we learned more about the business of music. You know what I'm saying?
What was your reactions to some of these sample clearance issues? I mean, you fall in love with the song, they're popular, and then you have to sort of, override the song, overhaul the song to make something totally different with a different sample.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I remember that this isn't really our story, but I remember the Odd Squad side of Rap-A-Lot had a song called Your Pussy's Like Dope, and that sample didn't clear, and they reworked it and reproduced it. And it was still a big record for people that didn't know. But for those of us that had heard the original version, it never really compared. You know what I'm saying? We went through that as well. There were records on this album that the record company reproduced. You know what I'm saying? Because samples didn't clear. Our paperwork did not dictate that they had to go to us to get the records reproduced if the samples didn't clear. That wasn't anything we thought we would need to put in the contract. But I mean, literally when we got the album, there were a couple of songs on there, like I think 1-900 Bun B, right? I think was a song that they reproduced as a record company. That was actually a song that I had produced. So, we learned a lot just about the mechanics of the music industry and how these things work. And again, I don't even think it was about the music, learning anything really about the music, other than we need to know more about the business of music. You know what I'm saying? And then after that, we learned, how to do interpolations of records as opposed to directly sampling the records. And that was a beautiful thing because that led to Pimp C actually being able to exercise his music knowledge and the transition from just really showing people he can make beats to showing people that he was a real producer.
You mentioned that songs that you produce, and I think people would sometimes be surprised that they see Bun B production credits on something like this. Talk about young Bun B as a producer.
Again, Pimp C was a producer. I made a couple of beats.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? I made a couple of beats. I would never go as far as to try to say that I was actually a producer. Basically, for me, it was about finding the right kind of sample, like was it Jockin' My Style with Infinity? You know what I'm saying? That's a song that I produced, and that's just me picking a record that I know most of my contemporaries would know. Isley Brothers, Between the Sheets, right? You'll see a pattern with Isley Brothers and UGK as the career goes on. But yeah, that was just about me finding the beat. I had no idea how to sample, go to the studio, hey, let's do this, give the beat to the engineer. He puts it into the machine. He figures out how to loop it. We, program some little bullshit drums under it. I rap on top of it. Boom, we got a record, But this was all like, I remember the record company owner, Russell and Chad, were getting into it at the time. They had some personal shit going on. And I was just really making beats and doing songs to not waste studio time, because studio time was, one, super hard to book, and two, super expensive. So once you had that session, somebody had to go and do something. So I was in there just trying to make music to just keep the shit going until Russell and Chad figure out what the fuck they gonna do. And then the real producer can come back and start getting the album and shit done again. But yeah, back then, yeah, if you look deep enough, there's a couple of production credits by Bun B, but nothing for me to, to brag on.
And at what point in the album process do you learn that they are repurposing the samples, that these original songs that you have made are not going to sound like y'all had made it? Is it when the album is out? Is it right before the album's out? Like, when do you find out that this is happening?
I didn't realize it had happened until they sent us copies of the album. And we
Wow.
took the plastic off of it and listened to it. And that's when we realized, hold up, man, it is literally the first song is one of them, right? Like Cocaine in the Back of the Ride. That's not MC's beat. You know what I'm saying? They took elements out of it and replaced it, the sample. And so from that beginning, we were just kind of like outdone. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't even get excited about this being out because this ain't us. This shit ain't jamming. You know what I'm saying? This ain't, you know, thank God that people actually still connected with us based on the few true UGK records that made it on the project, you know, the Pocket Full of Stones and stuff like that. But I mean, it was very rough as young artists realizing how much control we didn't have. You know, and from that point on, again, like I said, it stopped being about the music, started being about trying to educate yourself about the business, and started to put ourselves in a position of leverage, because at that point we really had none.
So Bill Withers calls you, tells you, asks you if you own your publish. Did you ever get it?
Yes, we did get it back before Pimp passed away.
Okay.
We did get full ownership of our publishing back. You know what I'm saying? So that was one of the things that we fought for in our career for many years. You know what I'm saying? And we didn't really get it back until, I think, right when Pimp came home. You know what I'm saying? We were in a position of getting the publishing back, and then we signed a licensing deal into existence that now gets passed on to the estate. And so because of the fact that we took advantage of the opportunity to sign off on the last 2 UGK albums as opposed to just one, that's why we were able to put the second album, the posthumous album, out so quickly. And a lot of the business was easy to transact because he had already signed off on a lot of different things before he passed away.
When was the last time you listened to Too Hard to Swallow?
It's been a long time. I am not the kind of person that really sits back and listens to my music. And keep in mind, I perform this stuff, you know, almost weekly to a certain extent. I just did a show this weekend. I performed Pocket Full of Stones. You know what I'm saying? I perform it all the time. But performing music and listening to music are two different things. It's two different dynamics, I think, for people. Because when I sing the music, it's not for me. It's not for my consumption. It's for the crowd, the listener, the audience. That's for their consumption. Whenever I hear my music, it's typically I'm caught off guard. You know, I might just come on randomly, you know, through my Apple phone, cutting on some shit. I have a radio show, the Two Show on Rock the Bells right now. And so my car radio is typically on Sirius on channel 43. So some old stuff may come up. I may pull up somewhere in the hood, and somebody might randomly be driving by playing that shit, or at the car wash or whatever. But it's always, honestly, it's kind of refreshing to know that music is something that, you know, so many years later, with so many millions of rap songs available to people, that the music I created over 30 years ago is still in some people's lives more favorable than music that's being made right now.
Do you remember where you were the day the album came out?
We were probably in PA, you know what I'm saying? I would probably guess that those albums probably went to Wes's house, you know what I'm saying, Pimp's mom's house, from Jive. But again, there was so much complication on the independent side. We were going through things with Russell at the time, from a larger scale with, you know, not really understanding, you know, what our obligations were and what really the dynamics of our record deal was, because there was issues with the lawyer that we had on our side, having been a former employee of theirs. And, you know, there was a lot of favoritism towards them in the contractual agreement, which we would have to fight over for the remainder of our tenure with that record company, all the way up until the record company literally dissolved. And we're still like in the red, you know, based off of that contract. But there's no one to negotiate terms with now.
Right.
You know, so it just kind of falls into default. But we will get grandfathered in. The rights will revert. The only reason they haven't reverted, because, you know, several of them are falling into that 25-year period, is because we took money after the year 2000. In 2007, UGK received a check from Sony. So I think our deal goes still 7 years after the 25-year window. So I think in maybe 2 or 3 years, the rights will revert back, as well as because being on Sony Records, everyone signed before 2000 has their debt cleared, but ours can't be cleared because we took money. So that complicates the ownership right reversal as well as clearing the balance. But it'll be a perfect time for the rights to revert because we will not owe them anymore, and we will have full ownership of those things. And so any way we choose to try to repackage that stuff or represent it and reissue it, that will benefit us. And of course, obviously, the co-writers and on the music as well. But
I think a lot of people think you drop an album and the next day you in a mansion and everything is good. What was your life like, in the couple weeks following this album? Where were you living? What does it look like for you?
Nothing changed. You know what I'm saying? Nothing changed at all. I remember having to try to move back on with my mom. That shit did not work. I was there for about a week. That shit didn't work. I was an adult doing adult things. They found my weed. They were like, can't smoke in here. I'm like, I shouldn't be here. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm too grown to be having weed in my mama's house. I got to get the fuck out of here. And that came with making some decisions and some choices in terms of how I chose to live and survive at the time. But yeah, no, for many, many years, man, in our career, we had to be self-reliant and self-sustained in order for us to, maintain a certain quality of life, because we didn't really get those kind of benefits from our record deal, So if we weren't doing shows, we had to side hustle. We had to figure that shit out. And I won't really go into it, but I mean, I did, I had jobs, you know what I'm saying? I worked for a good friend of mine, gave me a job. Shout out to Robert Bohannon. He's no longer with us as well. And so, yeah, man, we did what we had to do, and eventually the music and everything kind of caught up, and we were able to build like a fully sustained, not just lifestyle, but also business structure for us to take care of our families and still progress through the music industry to get to where we eventually got to.
What were some of the Bun B 9-to-5s?
I worked at the record store that Russell Washington owned. So Big Time Records was a record store primarily in King's Flea Market. So I worked there, and then I was like a delivery driver for a soul food restaurant. You know what I'm saying? My guy Bo's place, RBJ's in Port Arthur. And as far as legitimate jobs, that was it until I started teaching at Rice University. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That's not a bad little resume.
We had to do a couple of things, in a couple of places. I had to meet a man about a dog. Sometimes I had a cat. These things happen, and I don't look back at it like, man, I wish I hadn't done that. I really can't ask those kind of questions right now and make those kind of choices, because right or wrong, whatever it was I did or experienced got me to where I'm at right now in life. And outside of not having Pimp C personally, physically here to be a part of it, I mean, I can't really complain about what God has given me, turning 50 this year. Hip hop is turning 50 this year. You know what I'm saying? Life is coming full circle for me, having the burgers, all of these great things in life coming for me. There is, of course, the moments of survivor's remorse, just being very honest and human about it. I lost a lot of good friends around the way. I lost, some of my best friends, some would say one of my closest friends along the way. And you sometimes you stop and, you look at your life and you wonder, why am I here? But once you start asking those questions, you go down a different path. And, I got people that are counting on me and people that are dependent on me, not just in my house, right? But out in the world. I know that the words and the energy that I put out have actually literally affected people and changed people's lives. I mean, your personal story included, you know what I'm saying? And my mind is still blown when people say things like that. I hear that now as I'm older, and people that have been around for, the longevity of this UGK movement's tenure culturally in hip hop, can look back now in retrospect and actually tie specific life moments and decisions that it worked out for the positive to words that I put out into this world. And as we got to Riding Dirty and the music started to go further and further, and we started to reach more people, and then also got to react and interact with more people, right? We started to realize how seriously people were taking what we said. And then you could start to see a shift of, being honest about spirituality, being honest about relationships and, you know, being very transparent about who you are. So you never have to lie about that type of thing or make excuses for lies that were told, you know. We just kind of walked it like we, you know, talked it. And I think a lot of people saw that and connected with that.
A lot of questions I have about that is take me on a few tangents, but I want to talk about that story because I'm interested in, I mean, you guys are two men, tough men, you know, rappers who are, you know, don't take any mess from anybody. When do you start telling each other I love you as men? You know, like I said, it took hearing that for me to start saying that. A lot of men, black men, we don't say that to each other. When did you start telling each other as brothers that I love you?
I think there are moments that Pimp and I shared that we went through life that other people really wouldn't understand, right? And some of them are musical, some of them are personal, and typically one impacts the other, right? The music starting to impact the personal life, our personal life started to impact our musical career, right? And we weren't always in the same place at the same time. So there would be times where I would be deep down in the dark and Pimp would have to pull me back up and keep me going, and vice versa, you know. And you get to a point in your life where after you having been through things before, and you know, I had older brothers, but because my parents divorced, there was a part of my life where I didn't really bond and connect with them in that way. And Pimp was an only child, you know what I'm saying? And so he and I mean, he had a half sister to be fair, and a half brother, but grew up in the house alone. And I grew up in the house alone. And so, we did have a very strong bond with each other, to where, you know, shit, I called him in tears. He called me in tears. We shared many tears together, you know, and it became more of a brotherhood than a friendship. And we had lost people, you know, collectively, individually in life. And we treasured the fact that we still had each other. You know, we had been through some very, let's just say, precarious moments in this game, trying to make it in this world. And came out better for it sometimes, came out worse for it the other times. But we were still like together. There was a lot of shit that Pimp did and Pimp said, and I didn't really agree with how he went about it. But that was something for us to discuss in private, right? I never, you know, said whether or not I agreed with Pimp or disagreed with Pimp, right? Whatever he said, you know what I'm saying? Bun, how do you feel about that? Whatever he said, even if I don't agree with it, I'm still gonna ride with him on it. That's not gonna change. And so, yeah, as we, you know, went through more shit, experienced more things, like that was something that, you know, we were very easy about vocalizing, you know what I'm saying? And I can't remember it just being a day where we just say, hey man, you know, let's make sure we say we love you. It just became something that happened. And I think, I don't remember specifically any of the other times, but I distinctly remember the last time. You know, and he said, all right, Pee-wee, I'm going to talk to you later. I said, all right, Chad, I love you. But I love you too. And that was literally the last time I talked to him. And so, and we had worked out a lot of things. We were not in the same place. We were not seeing things eye to eye at the time. He was making a lot of decisions I didn't agree with, you know what I'm saying? But he was welcome to do it. I just couldn't take that walk with him in that way. But we had talked these things through and aired out all our differences. He said what he said. I said what I said. We had found common ground to come back on. And then we, you know, told each other we loved each other. So at least I did get closure. You know what I'm saying? I know a lot of people didn't necessarily get that closure based on where they stood. And, you know, at that time, you know, this thing happened so quickly and just, I mean, you know, who would have known that this would have happened? Obviously, many people, myself included, would have said more, you know, but this is kind of how life works. I'm just blessed that I was able to get some sort of closure with my brother and let that be the last thing we told each other. You know, it's a very fitting close to our relationship. That's where I am today.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's a question I've been dying to ask you since 2007 when I first heard you, you know, say that. I'm going to get back to Too Hard to Swallow a little bit. It's a pioneering trap album, right? We talked to Goody Mob a little while ago, and we talked about Soul Food. Now, Soul Food is an early trap album, and we talked about the legacy of trap people who were doing this: Ghetto Boys, Master P, all the way up to Gucci Mane and T.I. and Jeezy. But Too Hard to Swallow is has a lot of these trap elements in it. Like when I listened back, heard the word keys in it, and I'm just like, I can't think of an album before then that talked a lot about that used just that word keys, right? So talk to me a little bit about Too Hard to Swallow as a trap album.
Well, obviously, trap is the term that's used now. Because there was a period of dominance where this particular type of music was being created in Atlanta in crazy numbers with amazing efficiency. We, coming up looking at the Ghetto Boys, the NWAs of the world, but even like the Tough Crew back in the day, the Juice Crew, there was a lot of different inspiration for UGK, but it was really, when you looked at it, it was really about people trying to vocalize what was happening around them and paint the picture for people who weren't where they were from. And so that's kind of what we were doing in that moment. But at the same time, we were listening to this shit like, many people may not know this, but like, I think it might have been the first Click album, the West Coast, from the Bay Area. And I remember they had a song called The Drought Season. You know what I'm saying? And we were like, that's not even some shit people really know about. Like, it's a drought right now. Can't nobody get no work. You know what I'm saying? It's hot. And we were like, okay, see, now I know we not tripping. Because they way over there in the Bay, right? And they talking about how they getting down just like we getting down. We had seen New Jack City at this point. You know what I'm saying? We understood, Ghetto Boys, the world is a ghetto. You know what I'm saying? This is what's immediately going around us. Yeah, maybe once we get some money and go somewhere and get some bread and get to moving around, maybe we might see some different shit and have a different worldview. But for our immediate area, the immediate people that we deal with, this is what's happening right now. This shit, selling this shit is crazy right now. That's what's really doing it. And boys is making some real money. You know what I'm saying? So, now obviously there are people who are making a conscious effort to try to insert themselves into that world, and with no proximity and no real true entry point into it. They're just really good at making music and putting words together. And that's cool. I don't knock nobody. I would prefer you not go out and sell drugs. But I also prefer you not misrepresent yourself either. You know what I'm saying? But did we sell every key we said we sold? No, of course not. You know what I'm saying? Did I do some things I'm probably not proud of? Absolutely. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to incriminate myself out here, but I did do a considerable amount of what we talked about. I'm not saying I was Big Meech or nobody like that, but I touched some things, I got rid of some things, and that's really, but we had enough of an entry point and enough of a proximity to what was going on to be able to speak on these things in a way that people who were in that world could tell we knew what we were talking about, if nobody else knew.
Is that a thing where you hear it and you can hear somebody rapping about it and you don't know what you're talking about? Is that like an immediate thing?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why people who, if you look at the earliest days of Jeezy, right? Jeezy was not as good as constructing songs as he is now, right? Years of experience making one of the best, period. But in the earliest days, it was just the terms he used, the reference points. You know what I'm saying? This was basically a lot of insider information. You know what I'm saying? And so that's why it was received, accepted, and it moved so quickly, because it was like, I don't know who this boy is, but he talking about that shit. And this is not just regular corner boy type of shit. This is real big highway talk. You know what I'm saying? And many people hadn't really heard that in songs. And so it just grew. It grew rapidly. And there were other people that spoke from that as well. The 2 Chainz of the world, you know what I'm saying? The T.I.s of the world eventually came along as well. So, yeah, I understand that we were very early in talking about it, but we were far from the first people, you know, talking about it. I would argue even records like Northside 5-2 by Schoolie D is talking about that same type of thing. We're talking about White Lines, you know, the message, all of that stuff is talking about what's happening in the immediate community and environment that people are living in.
Pocket Full of Stones is one of the timeless songs in hip hop history. What do you think it is about that particular song that has stood the test of time and is one of the most referenced lines and songs in all of hip hop?
I couldn't really say what made it stand the test of time. I can only say that when I think about music for me like that, like, you know, Easy Does It, you know, came on the other day, you know what I'm saying? I think music ties us to a certain time and period in our life. I think people that hear Pocket Full of Stones remember when this was a very new thing, right? This was talking about having a pocket full of stones and being on the corner selling dope and shit like that. There was not a lot of people making music about it, right? And so doing it from that perspective, like hoping to get a broad audience was was a backwards way of thinking at that time, because that was not a popular form of music. You know what I'm saying? That was not the biggest shit. They got on the tours and everything. It eventually got accepted and found its way, right? Ghetto Boys, Scarface, NWA, groups like that eventually found their place amongst their contemporaries at the time. But it was not like the quickest way from A to B if you was trying to get money, you know what I'm saying? But if you were trying to be real, right, and connect with people who are actually in those communities, in those little pockets of America where this shit was actually happening and these drugs were affecting people's lives for better or for worse, depending on, you know, the dynamic that you exist in. We were just trying to, you know, be genuine and be authentic so that when motherfuckers, you know, saw us, we could actually be who we said we were.
Where'd the phrase come from?
Pocket Full of Stones. Okay, so I'm going to say name. I don't want to say names. You know what I'm saying? But I had a really good friend of mine. We were riding around in my car. It was me and Pim and my friend. And we were going to pick my friend's brother up. And so we're actually riding around. I had just got the CL Smooth, P Rock and CL Smooth album, the first album. And so this was the album where they play a song and then he would like loop a sample by itself and then it would go into another song. And so literally we were picking up the brother got in the car and everybody like speaking, trying to dap him up. He's like, man, get the fuck out of here, man. I got a pocket full of stones, man. We got to get the fuck from around here, right? And at the time, the loop that's in the song was actually playing on the Pete Rock and CL Smooth album. And so Pimp started saying, I got a pocket full of stones. Like, this actually organically happened in the moment. And you know, he went back, he never forgot it. And this was crazy because typically Pimp was not impressed by the average hip hop album. I can only remember 2 albums specifically that I played in front of him that he wasn't immediately like, get that shit out of here. I don't want to hear that shit. And that was that album by which was produced by Pete Rock, who he had a lot of respect for. And then the other one was Slum Village. I played the Slum Village album for him. And he was like, I don't really know what these niggas talking about, but these beats is dope. The way he cut that record up is crazy. And that was Jay Dilla. You know what I'm saying? Pimp could recognize the attention to detail and craftsmanship, even in music that he normally wouldn't even fuck with or gravitate to. But that was basically how that happened. That sample was playing from that album. That statement was made, and a classic is born.
When you get in the studio, he's saying it, playing the loop, what is your reaction to hearing just that part before you even lay your verse down?
I mean, that shit was hard. You know what I'm saying? The drums, and then there's other elements. There's the horn sample in there, the Richard Pryor say motherfucker. You know, there's a couple of other things that get added to it. But I mean, that bitch was dope, you know, but Pimp made dope beats. You know, this was just one of many. We did kind of say exactly what we were wanting to say, and we did tie it up in a neat bow, you know, trying to show that this shit is cyclical. You know what I'm saying? Once you get into it, it's very hard to get out of it. You know what I'm saying? You you're not positioning yourself to do something outside of this. So you end up stuck having to do it because you don't know how to do nothing else.
What was the song construction process like for this album? Was it a sample and then y'all put it together, or were y'all thinking of ideas and talking, like, how do you get from point A to point B on making a song for this album back then?
Well, I mean, again, for me, obviously, it was just me finding loops that I thought people would have liked and trying to make a cool song out of it. But I think a lot of Pimp's, Pimp's production was a lot of, admiration and respect for musicians that had come before him. But he had a very clear vision of how he wanted this group to be heard and seen. And so a lot of that stuff was really, it was his baby. Many times I came in, the song was already done. If he didn't have a hook for it, I would try to come up for a hook for it at that time. But, a lot of times, like, man, Pimp will play some shit, like, man, I came up with this shit. I think this shit would be dope. Then we say this on there. I'd be like, yeah, that shit dope. I can write to that. And it's very easy for us to construct the narrative because we didn't talk about the same shit. We didn't talk about the same things, nor did we talk the same way, about things. So there was always going to be an opposing view as to how to translate what we were talking about, which point of the argument we stood on, which was never opposing. It was just different alternative views on how to get from A to B. But regardless of the course we thought we were taking, where we started from was mutual. Where we were trying to get to was mutual, and I think we were able to get a lot of that across with the music. But this was just about trying to make shit, that we thought was jamming, was going to sound good in the trunk. Very seldom do you know you're making something that contributes to history or can even be, classified as historic as you're doing it. You know what I'm saying?
One of the things that stands out about this album is your voices. Like when people, you guys have two very distinct voices in hip hop. Obviously your voice is deep and you have a certain flow, and Pimp C has the, high pitched voice. But on this album, his voice a little bit deeper. You're rapping a little bit slower. Talk about, the vocal inflections that you're using on this album and sort of how that evolved.
Well, Pimp had always had a higher pitched voice. You know what I'm saying? And he always thought it might sound crazy. So in his earliest days, he was always trying to pitch it down. You know what I'm saying? And my thing was, when I do hear myself rap at a younger age, it's very off-putting because a lot of it's very rushed. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to make the lyrics as, seem as aggressive as I am. And for people that can't see me, they're going to hear me before they see me, and there's a picture of me. And it's funny because people always tell me when they see me, I thought you'd be taller. You know what I'm saying? Because I've tried to make music that was imposing before I ever walked in the room and created that standard of like, hey, here comes Bun B, you already know, not taking no shit, right? So even if I'm not as tall or as big as you think I am, you still have to take into consideration, well, this dude don't take no shit, so do I want to test it or, that kind of a thing. But we were really, still very young, trying to figure out who we are. We were still teenagers at this point. We were not grown men, far from it, not mature, anything like that. But we were very clear about how we wanted to be seen in this world. And I think the voices are a bit of a reflection of how we wanted to be seen and heard in this world. And eventually we figured out how to be a little bit more natural and still convey who we needed to convey, but without having to do any of that stuff.
When did you find that comfort, and how did you find that comfort to be like, this is actually how I want to sound, and, stop searching for that imposing sort of, persona in there and just be who you want to be?
I think with Riding Dirty, it was, when we got to Riding Dirty, we realized we're actually here, right? Like we're rappers, we're putting out music. There's no sophomore slump, any of that shit. So, and Riding Dirty was a point where we were like, fuck all this other shit. I'm tired of this with the rec company and that. We may never get videos and we don't give a fuck. So let's make sure we're saying everything we really want to say. There is still no video for Riding Dirty. We're not in a commercial. That's another thing that we were sitting at home and the commercial for Riding Dirty just comes on TV. We had no idea when they filmed it, how they filmed it. We knew nothing of it. You know what I'm saying? And because of having those constant situations, we just wanted to make one album. And that was it. We didn't even take any money up front for Riding Dirty. We were just like, send us some equipment. give us a recording budget and creative control, and we don't want any money. And they agreed to it. And so that's why Riding Dirty to us is the first actual, pure UGK album, because it's the first time we got to fully express who we were sonically and verbally. And that's why it all came together like it did. Too Hard to Swallow is just us being good enough in the moment to not fuck up the opportunity.
So you mentioned some of the equipment that you got, and apparently Riding Dirty was the first album to use Pro Tools, right?
Yeah, actually, Joe, who actually brought that to the table, Joe said that Pro Tools was actually still in beta when we used it.
What was the recording equipment and all that stuff looking like for Too Hard to Swallow?
Oh, that was 2-inch reel.
Mm-hmm.
That was like a 2-inch reel, you know what I'm saying? Which is, a much more laborious process, a lot more time consuming process. And again, as I said, studio time, real studio time, like in a full service place, was very hard to find, hard to convince people to do with rap music. And it was very expensive. You know what I'm saying? And so it was a very tenuous process, to be very honest, the time it took to mix these records down, the time it took to lay vocals, because there was no, like, just hit the space bar and start again. Records were very delicate, right? This tape that we recorded to was very delicate. So even the idea of how the tape would be rewound, how the tape would play, all of that type of stuff took so much time, So, we tried to do as much as we could as possible beforehand, right? Practicing the rhymes with the music, just to make sure we didn't waste time laying vocals. You know what I'm saying? That type of thing. It was very, very laborious of a process that took a lot. It demanded a lot from both of us. But the time that it took for me to do what I needed to do in the studio was nothing compared to what it took for Pep to do what he needed to do in the studio. That would create these beats. He would track the production out. He was being there. He was part of the mixing process, standing over it, trying to fly out to the mastering and all of that. And, UGK was his baby. He woke up and slept with it a lot more than I did. So I just tried to make sure I didn't fuck up his process and didn't complicate it.
A lot of times you talk to rappers, especially who are using that laborious equipment stuff back then, they were feeling the need to do it and do their albums and do their songs in one take. Was that sort of how it was for you? Yeah,
and it just ended up becoming a thing for me, because I never wanted to be the reason why we were in the studio longer than we needed to be, and maybe would have to buy another hour.
Right.
That was always the thing, right? We got this much time. We got to do everything we need to do in this time, because if we got to book another hour or something like that, who's going to pay for it?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
So you was mostly one take?
Most of it. You know what I'm saying? There's actually versions of like Cocaine in the Back of the Ride where we got to the point where we would literally be on the same mic doing each other's ad-libs, so that we didn't have to waste time loading up another track and going back and doing another ad-lib. But it never really sounded right. So we just ended up having to go back and do our own ad-libs anyway.
So with that said, is there something that when you listen back or when you think back on the album that sort of, as a perfectionist, as an artist, something that drives you crazy when you go back and listen to it?
All of it.
Okay.
All of it, every single verse, every single rhyme, because it's so rushed. A lot of it is so rushed because I just want to get it in, get it done, and get out and be like, time, right? Kind of a thing. It was like speed chess. Still chess, but it's speed chess.
I was born in Lafayette, Louisiana. So we, cousins in a little bit in that way. And one of the things about being from a place like Lafayette is that it's a real dope city right next to a really big popular city, right? And I think that's something that Port Arthur sort of shares in relationship to, Houston. Like, what is that mentality that's like when you're in a town like that and you want to, show up this big brother, big city and show them what you have, and you bringing that in your debut album?
Well, just to be fair, Lafayette is bigger than Port Arthur. Y'all
yeah.
Y'all got a lot going on. But the dynamic still remains.
Right.
You just want to be able to say you could compete with the big city. It's city mouse, country mouse kind of a thing, for us. And we just wanted to show that we felt we could compete, right? We felt the music could stand up against anybody else. And we were able to prove that throughout the course of our career. And it wasn't, we were trying to say we were better than other people. We were just You know, we're as good, if not better, but we definitely as good as anybody else that's doing it. Just give us a chance. Give me the platform. Give me the stage. I'll take it from now. And I think that we were able to accomplish that in a period of time quickly, because at the time when we were introducing ourselves to Houston, there was a lot of separation in the city. The north side of Houston and the south side of Houston were not getting along. So north side artists couldn't really take advantage of the club scene on the south side and vice versa. Well, we weren't from Houston, so we could go to all the clubs. You know what I'm saying? So in a time where other people had to pick and choose where they could even go and present that shit, we went everywhere. We went, and we were from the hood, so going to a hood club wasn't shit.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so anybody that was willing to have us and pay them a little $500 and $750, because we weren't even getting no real money back then, right? We showed up, but we even got that little bread. You know, north side people loved it, south side people loved it. We made a lot of traction and at that time, because we were able to get booked at clubs that some people simply could not afford to get booked at, or, you know, deal with some beef or some crazy shit. Not saying that people were scared, people were just playing it smart.
I watched the Hip Hop Evolution, and you said that Pimp C, you and y'all were each other's favorite rappers. Do you remember the moment that Pimp C became your favorite rapper?
Yeah, it was Cocaine in the Back of the Ride. You know what I'm saying? Like, Cocaine in the Back of the Ride to me is the quintessential, and I very seldom talk about this, but Cocaine in the Back of the Ride is designed for both of us to go off. Throughout the course of UGK's musical legacy, many songs were crafted for different reasons. Some songs are crafted that play to Pimp C's strengths, right? Some songs are crafted that play to my strengths, right? And as we got older and more experienced, we knew how to create those type of records. Cocaine in the Back of the Ride is Bun B and Pimp C at their finest. Both young, both raw, both hungry. You know what I'm saying? And it's as equal a performance as you get. The closest thing to it, I think, for us might be maybe Pinky Ring or Murder. You know what I'm saying? Even though Murder was created to be more of a Bun B record, Pimp C still holds its own. Even though Pinky Ring is created to be a Pimp C record, Bun B still holds its own. But they're great examples of the tandem. But I don't think anything shows the balance of who Bun B and Pimp C is better than that first song. That's why it's the first thing you hear. You know what I'm saying? Both on the independent version and I believe on the studio album. You know what I'm saying? At that time, we thought that was like the perfect representation of who we were.
Speaking of the song Murder, we recently had Big Crit on the show, and I know you two have collaborated on some of his tracks and other projects, and I wanted to give him the opportunity to ask you any question, and this is what he said. Check it out.
Oh, man, I got you. Did he understand how his verse on Murder would change the perception of Southern lyricism?
That's an amazing question. Not consciously, right? I'll be very honest. I wasn't concerned about Southern rappers or Southern rap as a whole. I had been very adamant that I was not given enough opportunities to show people how good I could rap, right? And the problem was that Pimp was always bragging on me, right? Bump, the best rapper, he's always at it. And I tell him, quit giving me this slow ass shit. Because typically a lot of UK music is a very, slower tempo. And so Murder was like, okay, this gonna be the one. You know what I'm saying? And I was like, I went out the night before and I had gotten very drunk. I typically, I'm very good at my liquor. I've only been hungover maybe 4 times in my life. And the day I wrote Murder, I was hungover. I came to the studio, the beat played, I wrote my rhyme, and this was at Skip Holman's house in Katy. And Skip had a huge SSL board, right? The first time I'd ever seen like a big full SSL board. And so, and Skip was an engineer and he was a craftsman in terms of studio build outs and that kind of stuff. So where other studios may have a bunch of wires and things underneath the board, his was very clean. It was run for, I think, maybe 3 chairs, maybe even 4, whatever. Long story short, I went to sleep under the booth. It was the darkest place because then the room is lit up, but the board is so big, it's the only place with a shadow. right, with a little bit of darkness. So I crawled up under there while they're tracking the beat out on the boards. That took about an hour and a half or so like that. It was like, okay, we're ready. And so he goes in and he does his verse first. He does it in maybe, I don't know, maybe 4 takes. I can't really remember. I know it didn't take long. And again, this is on Pro Tools. So you can actually punch in and that kind of a thing, right? And so they wake me up. So I'm up, I'm waiting. I'm like half in, half out while Pimp's saying his vocals. That's why I can't remember exactly how many takes. And I go up, I go in the booth, and I'm tired. I'm like, I don't want to be in there all day. And so I do a take of it, and I get all the way through at the end. And they're like, well, it's kind of sketchy towards the end of it, so let me just punch you in. I was like, no, I don't want to punch in. They're like, Bun, I know you don't want to be here. You fucked up. You tired, bro. Let me just punch you in. You'll be done. I'm like, I have to be able to do it in here so that when it's time to be at a show, I can do it out there. And I have to be able to do it under any condition. So if I can say this fucking rhyme all the way through right now, I should be fine any given night to do this song. So the version of Murder you hear from me is the second take. And there was only 2 takes.
That's incredible. Murder on 2 takes while hungover. That's like the rap Jordan flu game or something.
Right. So in retrospect, right, there's no way I could have thought what this song would have meant to other people. I realize now it's a beacon. It sends a beacon out to artists saying that you can be equally lyrically proficient and Southern, right? You do not have to be one or the other. You can exist in both of those spaces simultaneously and be just as true to either one. You know what I'm saying? And so that now tells people, oh, in order to rap fast or to be very technical, I don't have to sound like that. I can still sound like me. Oh, shit. Now, well, let's go. You know what I'm saying? Let's really, really go. And, I'm not the one to sit back and pinpoint who did what, when, and where, or whatever. But I do know that before Murder, motherfuckers were not like commonly trying to be that lyrical. You know what I'm saying? There were some people who were lyrical, but they couldn't really make commercial music. And there were people who could make commercial music who couldn't really be that lyrical. But I know that Murder does, for many people signify like a turning point in Southern lyricism. And in terms of, from a technical aspect, right? And adamantly trying to prove that I am a lyricist. I am an MC. I'm not just a rapper out here saying some shit, you know what I'm saying? On a record saying whatever the fuck comes, I'm actually trying to execute wordplay at the highest level within this culture, within this genre of music. And I think with Murder, I think I hit it on the head.
Oh, absolutely. I love that story so much, man. That's a beautiful story. I love it. All right, we're going to do quick questions. 3 rapid fire questions. First thing that comes to your head. What's the other best thing Bun B cooks besides burgers?
Hamburger helper.
Okay. All right.
Just being honest, my hamburger helper spaghetti is like, it's A1. Like,
do you do something else with it besides just take it out the box?
I mean, look, I put a lot of, I grew up a latchkey kid. You know what I'm saying? So I prepared a lot of my meals by myself. And so I put a lot of care and concern into it because I would have to maybe stretch it out for 2 meals. You know what I'm saying? And I have a very particular palate.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? So I do flavor things differently. Like, I tried to break up the process and do things the way I would want them to do. So if you eat my ramen, you would say, okay, well, I've eaten ramen before, but I didn't know you could make ramen like that. It's still this, but at the end of the day, you still get what you're trying to get in the bowl, but it's just the process. And then obviously I'm not the best person that can make the burger anyway. Like, I'm not the best chef in the house.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? I am far from being the best chef in the house. You know what I'm saying? But I do know good food when I eat it. And that's a primary part of why I married the woman I married.
All right.
Because she can burn like heavy. Like, we never have to, we eat out because we want to, never because we have to.
2 more questions. I'm gonna let you go. I know you're busy. Got Burger Empire to run. What is the best Southern posse cut of all time?
Bring It On, Ghetto Boys.
Okay. All right. Why? I'm curious. Why that? I know I said rapid fire, but I need to know.
Bring It On is like the prime of, this is the prime of Rap-A-Lot. Rap-A-Lot has a full roster of artists embodying so many different aspects of hip hop, not just Houston, but many of them do represent Houston. And this is when like Big Mello is on top. I mean, just Scarface comes in. I mean, you listen to it, man, there's so many different artists going on it. The only thing I think that's better than that is maybe 1-900 Dollar Crook, which Seeds 1-900 Hustler by Rockefeller is basically their version of that. If you go back and listen to 1-900 Dollar Crook, that's a crazy song, but it's not necessarily a posse cut. It's a song with several artists on it. But just when we think posse cuts, or rapper, the rapper, the rapper, the rapper, it's hard to beat a lot of those Soldier posse cuts, right? But I would definitely say Bring It On by the Ghetto Boys. And it's a good 6 minutes long, at least.
Last question. What's one song from another artist that you wish was yours?
Having Things by Big Mike.
Okay. All
so,
right.
Having Things is one of the first features, like beats and hooks that Pimp sells. I'm not around when this transaction happened, right? So when I hear the song, and Mike already has it, he's already recorded it and everything, I hear the song, I get in my feelings. Because if I would have been there, ain't no way that would have left the team. Having Things is as close to a UGK record that you can have without Bun B and Pimp C actually rapping on the record. You know what I'm saying? Do I think it would have been what Big Mike eventually made it? No. But that beat and that hook was going to go, period. Regardless, I think, of anybody rapping on it, that bitch was going to go. The hook was solid. The track was A1. From that point on, we created a veto system where before he gave away a beat or a hook or something like that, he had to run it, specifically the beat. He had to run it by me and make sure I didn't want it for UGK. And we kept that up for many years until I realized this boy could make hits all day and I don't have to keep nothing, as if he can make this shit all day. And at that point, I stopped giving a damn, because the reality is that he's making these records for specific people. Like, he's a craftsman. He's not just sending people a CD of beats and you pick something. He actually always went in the studio with people, talked to them, listened to what they had already done, and created something specifically for them. But I was so caught off guard by how jamming that bitch was. You know what I'm saying? Like, man, he can't be giving away this kind of shit. Who knows how many of these kind of hits we could, you know what I'm saying? But that's the one record, Having Things by Big Mike.
Anything else you'd like to discuss about Too Hard to Swallow before I let you go?
You know, the things that I look at as flaws, right, in retrospect, you know, the things that I thought could have been done better and all of that, you know, hindsight is always 20/20. But I will say this. In my rawest form, like, you know, like the rawest version of me, like as a human being, as an artist, I was still seen and heard, and that version of me, which I look at, you know, at the present time, and not being the best version of me. And I still look back at it as, you know, looking at my life in totality up to where I'm at now, it's definitely not the best version of me, right? My life is more dependent on that version of me than any other point in my life, because that's the point of me that said, fuck it, and jumped off the cliff. You know what I'm saying? And without that, you know, living a life of, you know, being reserved and being too cautious and being anxious and letting these other emotions really take me away from what it is I really want to do and who I really want to be. You know, even without knowing whether or not he could make it, that version of me still jumped off the cliff. You know what I'm, and I'm forever grateful to it. I really am. You did your shit.
I'm grateful for you, man. I'm so happy you here. Came and talked to us. The legendary Bun B. Thank you for joining us, talking about Too Hard to Swallow. Thank you so much for being here, my man.
No, thank you, my guy. Appreciate y'all.
Absolutely. That's it for today. I'm your host, David Dennis Jr., and this is Rap Stories. See you next time. This podcast is produced by Podville Media for Andscape, a Black-led media platform dedicated to creating, highlighting, and uplifting diverse Black stories. Andscape, where blackness is infinite. Dina Morrison is the series producer. Our production team: Brittany Danielle, Rob Spiewak, Lenika Belfield-Martin, Ethan Sands, and Eli Nellis. The series was edited by Stephen Williams, Kelsey Johnson, and Rob Ford. Executive producers: Steve Reese, Elizabeth Elson, and Oscar Zabayos. Raina Kelly is Andscape's Vice President and Editor-in-Chief. David Oku created the original artwork for the series. Special thanks to Tracy Smith, Mike Shahade, Rami Moguldam, Katie Lawson, Beth Stoikov, Anna Grambling, Ashley Melfi, John Gotti, Kelly Evans, Ryan Broadhead, and Kevin Wilson. And I'm your host, David Dennis Jr. Thank you for listening.